Yes.
We're live on YouTube, everyone.
Hey, YouTube. Okay, so something very embarrassing is probably going to happen where the YouTube over here is going to start playing, but hopefully that won't happen. So that's the warning, and with that, I'll give everybody a big welcome. We are Wednesday Web Jam. We are cheeky co-creators. We are compassionate facilitators, ignorant experimentalists, hungry learners, clumsy innovators, and change makers. And some of us call ourselves designers, and there we go. That's the stupid YouTube that started over there. I had to mute it. And that's a perfect segue into the next slide, which is what we're all about here at Wednesday Web Jam, which is failing forward. There is no other way. That's our motto. What that means is that this is a sort of a sandbox for us to experiment and play together and learn together through the guests that we invite to this wonderful forum. And what's wonderful about it is we try to create a safe environment for us to experiment and to share together. So please be kind to one another, be nice, be empathetic. That's kind of our ethos. No throwing sand in the sandbox, so to speak. With no further ado, I do want to introduce our guest today. It's my good friend David Phillips, and I will tell you, I learned a lot of what I know about this world of design thinking, human-centered design from this wonderful human, David Phillips. Very smart. He and I had a conversation a month or so ago about something he was curious about sharing, and that's what we're going to talk about today: data delusions, how math, metrics, and analytics can mislead us. So that's what we're here to explore together with you guys. We have well, no, I'm not gonna go there. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I'm gonna hand it over to you, David. If you give me that agenda slide, I'll do that, and then I'll hand it right back over to you.
You bet.
And here we go.
Oh, sorry, wrong one. Hold up. Hold, please. We are exploring. Clearly, we're exploring.
Is this part of sharing forward?
It is indeed. So David is just about 2 hours north of me in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am in Greenville, South Carolina. If you guys want to just in the chat, if you want to introduce yourselves and where you're dialing in from, that would be a lot of fun just to see where everybody's joining us from.
Hold, please. Your call is very important. Let's get the right stuff up here. Ta-da! All right, here you go, Mark.
All right, fantastic. So today's agenda, I've already introduced David. This is going to go in 3 parts. What we're going to do is Dave's going to kind of introduce 3 different topic areas. And at the end of each of his little segments where he introduces that topic, we're going to pause for a second for you to put your questions about that topic or your observations or whatever in the chat. And so that will be 3 different times. And we'll pause. We'll tell you to go ahead and put the questions and observations in the chat. You can probably do that as you're listening to David as well. That's perfectly fine. And here's the thing. Your Zoom chat is like your bag that you're going to carry with you to to where you go into the breakout room. At about 34 minutes past the hour, we're going to put you in a breakout room for about 10 minutes with some colleagues whoever wants to go, and you're going to choose which of those subjects you want to discuss with other people. And we'll let you go into those breakout rooms and talk about each of the topics or whichever topic you want to talk about. And then we'll bring you back and we'll have a short debrief. And then as always, we're going to have the backstage where we'll have more time to dig into this whole thing about data. And with that, David, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. All right. So the key here is what Mark said, we're going to explore. So I'm just going to share with you some stuff I've been exploring and thinking about and reading about and kind of chewing on for a while, and thought, hey, what a better place than the Wednesday Web Jam to share this stuff. And my thinking is still very much evolving. So When we get to those prompts to ask for your questions and comments, and when you get into the breakout rooms to debate, by all means, please push back like, actually, here's something you may not be aware of, or point us in another direction. This is that kind of space today. This is very much the sandbox. All right, so enough of that. I want to start with a scenario, a situation, as it were. This is a real world situation about suburban driving habits in the US. In particular, a very specific shopping center here in Charlotte, North Carolina. You can see by this diagram, and I really want to focus on this T intersection. So at this particular intersection, there is a stop sign. And most of the cars that are coming down that the horizontal road there, they're when they get here, almost all of them are turning left, because to the left down there in the bottom of this diagram is one of the exits of the shopping center. But here's what's really interesting. Only some of the people actually stop at the stop sign. Quite a few simply roll right through it. Maybe they'll kind of pause, but they simply tend to roll right through it. And our question as designers, as innovators, as solution finders is, what's going on? So here's some data, and this is just a snapshot of the data we've recorded at this specific intersection. So I want you to think about, as you're looking at this data, think about what you know about people's driving habits, whether it's based on gender or age or type of car they drive. Why are some of these people stopping and some are just like, can't be bothered? What's up with this? What insights can you glean from this data? Again, it's a small sample, but it is representative of the data we collected. Can you come to any conclusions? If I forced you to come to a conclusion, could you come up with something? I'm pretty sure you could, because I know everybody on this call is a smart person. You might also have already figured out that I'm trying to mislead you, because that's exactly what I'm trying to do. Or in some ways, it's somewhat incomplete. Yeah, the expensive car stops, right? Well, we know the people with expensive cars, they don't want to risk, right? So thank you, Sarah, in the chat. But you know what? Let's look at this from a different point of view. Let me share, get back to my Zoom here. Let me share some video from this research. Hold please, pull up our video file. All right, let's see what we got now. Y'all seeing the video play?
Yep.
And it's a very nice shopping center, right? It's nicely landscaped, well laid out. Here's one angle from that T intersection, but let's look at it from here. Here we go. A stop? No, not really. But this one. Oh yes. Good job, driver. Maybe it's a mom in a Suburban. Maybe got kids in the back, got to take care of the kids. They drive safely. Ooh, that's it.
I think it's because the car is red, David.
The red cars. The red cars. Well, this is a non-red car and not going to stop at all.
No.
But apparently they didn't roll through this fast enough. All right, here we've got.
Oh, almost an accident. There
Yeah,
we go.
that's one way to do it. I love this guy in the minivan, or this person in the minivan. He's seriously thinking about passing in the turn.
I thought it was all going to be all red cars. I was pretty sure it was not.
Yeah. So what happened? Well, let's look at this from a different point of view, shall we? From the driver's point of view. This is what a driver in an SUV sees when they look right before they turn left. Here's what a driver in a sedan sees when they look right. Not behind the white line, turn left.
Yeah, sedan is a saloon for the UK people.
I gotcha. It's fairly clear now, with this additional qualitative data. Problem here is not the car color it's the height of the driver because of those hedges, right? If we remove the hedges, right, that obstacle's gone, they can see just fine. So the point of that, I get back to sharing our slides, is that the data that we gathered was incomplete. It only told part of a story. However, if we were forced to, we could have come up with reasons why some people were stopping and some people weren't based on the data we had. So I start our conversation today off with that story to kind of go into these 3 points I want to cover. One is about humans and data and how we react to data and how we process data, again, as humans, with all the greatness and not so greatness that's a part of us. We're talking about flaws and frames, and then the third thing is about metric fixation. So let's dive into humans plus data, shall we? So there's really 3 reasons why we as human beings tend to sometimes react in ways that don't work for us when it comes to data, analytics and statistics and math and all this sort of stuff. So here's one. It's called the spotlight effect. And the spotlight effect is simply this, that sometimes we act as if what we see is all there is. And when we're looking at data, it's incumbent upon us, if we want to make good decisions and good judgment, is to ask, what are we not seeing in the data, right? What did we not see in this chart? Well, there were a lot of things we didn't see. It didn't show us, about hedges. It didn't show us about weather. It didn't show us about other traffic or time of day or time of year. I mean, any number of things could have influenced the driver behavior there. But it's easy to go, here's a bunch of data. Let me just dive in, right? Spotlight effect. And sometimes it leads us astray. The second thing is that sometimes we conflate precision with certainty. So for example, some of you may know this, that there are 741,882 Big Macs sold per day in the US. That's crazy, is it not? Well, do you think it's true? Because here's my source for that number. I made it up. I made that number up. And it turns out that the actual number is actually about double that. There are about almost 1.5 million Big Macs sold in the US per day. But the point here is that it would have been easy to just accept that number, sometimes because of the precision. Like, this was rounded to 3 decimal places. It must be accurate. It might be precise, but it doesn't mean it's accurate, right? It doesn't mean that we should treat it with that level of certainty. And then the third element here of humans and data, so sometimes how we react to data gets in our way, is something called motivated reasoning. So this is a cognitive bias that we all struggle with, all of us, right? It's part of the prize package of being human, these cognitive biases that we have to deal with. Motivated reasoning is one such bias, and it's defined this way, that motivated reasoning is thinking through a topic with the aim, either conscious or unconscious, of reaching a particular conclusion. Okay, here's what I think. You're giving me some data. I'm going to distort and contort this data so it fits with what I already think. Similar to confirmation bias, but not exactly the same. And as usual, we can always go back to our friends at Dilbert to come up with some representative in the business world of how we do sometimes kind of dumb things. And even that last panel, right? Remind me why I went to college. Some liar probably convinced you it was a good investment. These days, I'm not sure that's not untrue. But anyway, right? Let's talk more about this notion of motivated reasoning, specifically because what we're really talking about is an emotional reaction to data, right? To statistics, to math, to analytics, to all these sorts of things. And here's an example. So here's a data point that Mars is 30 million miles away from Earth. Did anyone have an emotional reaction to that statement? If I were to ask you to debate this and kind of pick this apart and analyze it, you could probably do so without worrying about, no, I'm a big Mars person and that's not right. I'm fired up about the Mars thing. Well, it turns out that, right, because Mars' orbit and Earth's orbit are elliptical, sometimes at the closest, we're about 30 million miles away. At other times, it's more than 200 million miles away. But my guess is that you're happy to sort of take that data in, take this information in and process it rather objectively. But I'm going to give you a trigger warning here. This next point is about guns in the US. But if we're presented with data, with statistics, with information about topics that we feel strongly about, then where motivated reasoning comes in is that if that information, if that data, those statistics support what we already believe, we tend to accept it. No problem, no questions asked. And if it conflicts with what we believe. We want to either dismiss it or ignore it or poke holes in it. You know, we want to discover why this is flawed information, because I'm not wrong and I feel strongly about this. And it doesn't matter what the topic is. If it's a topic we feel strongly about, again, how we react to the data we're presented can be influenced by even unconsciously by what we already think and what we want to believe is true. That is what motivated reasoning does for us. And I'm gonna share some resources at the very end of our time together today. But if nothing else, if you're not familiar with this TED Talk by Julia Galef, I cannot recommend it. I bet I watch it once a month. I kid you not. Why you think you're right, even if you're wrong. It's about motivated reasoning. It's a great framing. My only quibble with it, I wish she had titled it, Why We Think We're Right, Even If We're Wrong, because this affects every single one of us. So with that said, that's the wrap on this humans plus data. So Mark, what are we going to do here?
We are going to, I think you could talk about this sort of data, numbers and certainty and confirmation bias, the whole thing that I think we're all familiar with, especially in the political environment. You've got this thing that's coming up. You want to talk to us about flaws and frames. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and so I'm looking at the prompt in the chat as well.
Exactly, and I forgot completely. Boom, I'm off schedule. All right, failing forward or something like that. So Steve, if you could put the prompt in the chat, what we'd like for you guys to just take a moment, 1 minute, to put any thoughts or questions you have about the data delusions part that David just talked about, all of those pieces. Just 1 minute. And if you add your questions, they will go with you into the breakout room. So I see nobody adding questions. That's fine. If you want to just write them down, that's also fine. Yep. and so David, the whole example of the car reminds me of this saying that I like to use in the world of human-centered design, is that the quantitative data tells you what people are doing, and the qualitative data tells you why they're doing what they're doing. Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing, and you and I were talking about, like, maybe that's true, maybe it's not true, and when is it not true, right?
Yeah, it
so
certainly feels true.
It does feel true, but it may not. It may not be always true. So.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, because here's the thing. I want to make sure that this doesn't come off as I am attacking data and statistics and analytics and metrics. I am not doing that. It's incredibly valuable, right? There's a lot of stuff we're not going to see with our eyes. And so being able to use data and statistics and analytics and metrics is going to be valuable. The point I want to make is we want to be careful and make sure we're using our human judgment when we're making use of this numerical information.
Exactly. So now is when I'm going to say to you, Dave, you had another fun little subject you were going to tell us about. And that's
thank you, Mark.
Flaws and frames. Tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you for that segue, Mark. Let's talk about our second subtopic, flaws and frames. And these are going to go rather quickly. So a story I read recently blew me away, and I loved it. So I want to share it here. Guy who commutes on the London Underground, right, the tube, says that the data organized by and presented by, I think it's called Transportation for London. It's the city-based transportation organization. That the crush capacity of a train, and a train here I think is 8 cars, if I remember that correctly. But the maximum capacity, or you could stuff how many people in it, is just over 1,000 people. But based on their numbers, based on the data they've collected, the average occupancy of a train is 130 people. The guy who wrote the story is like, for him, and he's an economist, right? He's a statistician. He's like, there's no way that can be right, because my commute every day looks a lot like this. He says, you could lose 130 people on a train and not notice. So how can this possibly be? Well, this notion of, right, average occupancy is 130, get out of here. But he's like, but I'm also an economist, so I know they're just not making stuff up. How can these two things both be true? Here's what my experience is, but here's what they're saying the data show. Well, and he offers this really extreme example. So imagine if we had 10 trains and 9 of them, right, that we've collected data on, and 9 of them have 0 people on them. And the 10th has 1,000 people on it. What's the average occupancy? 100.
You did it
right?
faster than I could.
And the math is not wrong, but it's not super helpful, right? It's not, I mean, it's helpful in one extent. How many trains do we need? Or how many buses do we need? Or how many whatever we might need? What's the average? But the point here is this, that, the law of averages, as we understand that, but sometimes we need to understand that we have the flaw of averages, that averages, right, doing proper math doesn't always give us the insights to help us make informed decisions. And that leads me to the second point about frames, how we frame data and what data do we use, what statistics do we use can help us make more informed decisions. So if we go back to that example, right, the notion of using average number of riders per trains is a train-centric measure. Right? How many people per train? But we could look at another measure about what's the average rider experience per trip. Most people, right, are on that crowded train will say, yeah, my experience sucks. It's a ton of people on here. Where those people perhaps who are riding the train back, so think of just counterflow, right? Rush hour, everybody's going in, and a few people are riding back on an empty train. They're going against traffic. Well, maybe it's not an either or, perhaps this is a both and. In order to get measures and metrics and data that actually can help us make more informed decision. So the point here is to be aware of the flaw of averages, and that how we frame data and what frames we even use can impact the decisions we make. So we're going to pause here one more time, Mark.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of point out Rich Maynard, our friend, put a little note in there that context matters, and I think that's like really important when you think and I think there was another comment about any statistics you have to take into to account the context that you're using those statistics. So data can be really powerful to help us make our decisions, but it can also be a crutch that we rely on too much if we don't think about that context. So awesome stuff. And yeah, so if you guys want to take a few notes, plop those in the chat. That chat will go with you when you select to go into the breakout room. And then I think we're going to go into this, the third and final segment where you talk about metric fixation. Is that right, David?
Yes, we are going to talk about metric fixation. If you or someone you know. Actually, let me just say this before I get into that, because this is the last thing before we have a breakout discussion. Gosh, where was I going with this? It may have already left my brain. Oh, there's this notion about how we make use of data, right? How we present data to help others make decisions, whether in our organization, our clients, whomever, but it's also how we interpret data that other people are presenting to us, right? What context did they use? What did they actually measure? What's not in those measurements, right? So we can be discerning consumers of data and metrics and statistics and analytics. So that's kind of the overarching point here. All right, but let's get on to this notion of metric fixation. There's no doubt in my mind, I am 100% certain on this, that everybody on this session has heard one or more of these and quite possibly have used one or more of these quotes when we talk about the value of measurement, right? If you can't measure it, you can't improve it, which means that anything can be measured, can be improved. And of course, from our friend Tom Peters in the 80s, what gets measured gets done. I mean, it's hard to argue with that, right? What gets measured gets done. And so thus, we need some measures, and we need a lot of them because we want people to get stuff done. Yes, of course. So more measures are better. Maybe, but are they the right measures? But regardless of that, there is another side to this coin. You've probably heard this one as well. That not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So I want to narrow this way down just for a moment, because I really want to talk about how metrics can be used and misused and unknowingly misused where we're talking about human performance. Specifically, when we reduce performance to what can be measured in some standardized way, right? Or standardized way of doing things. So, and particularly as it relates to using measures to both, using metrics to measure and reward human performance. So this notion of Campbell's law is something I've just discovered recently, and I find it fascinating. Because until I read this recently, this is not something I'd given much thought to. And he writes that once a metric has been identified as a primary indicator for success, its ability to accurately measure success tends to be compromised. In other words, if it can be measured and rewarded, then it can be gamed, right? It can be corrupted. People can use it in ways it was unintended, or they can take advantage of such a metric, such a system. So for example, right? So how can metrics be gamed? It's specifically in this case, metrics that are used to measure and reward human performance. So one is that you can game, we as humans can game these sort of metrics through selection. So for example, let's say I'm the local prosecutor in my city, and I'm going to be rewarded, or I'm going to be certainly evaluated based on the number of cases that I bring to trial that I win. So then I might be incented, if that's how I'm being measured, that I'm not going to bring cases that I don't think I can win. So justice may be perverted because I'm focused on my scorecard, right? I may not choose to bring forward those that I'm not sure if I can win or not, right? And that's just one example. Another way that performance metrics can be gained is that we can improve numbers through the omission or distortion of data. So let's talk about police departments for a moment, right? When they are evaluated or rewarded for the number of crimes solved, right? Or how the percentage of felonies versus misdemeanors, or, whatever it might be, then there's an incentive to say, well, book that particular crime as a misdemeanor, not a felony, so our numbers don't go up, right? Or, oh, wait a minute, was that dead body found in our district or somebody else's district? Because we don't want this unsolved crime in our district. So make sure we know where it was found, or, let's leave it out of the data altogether. I remember back during the beginning of the COVID response in the US that there was some, when the cruise ships were coming back to shore with people infected with COVID, that I believe President Trump said, well, can we just leave them on the ship so our numbers don't go up? I mean, as an absurd comment as that was, if you are focused on numbers, well, that's a good way of doing it. Don't put them where we're going to count them. Leave them where they don't count. And then just cheating, right? People will cheat, but especially when the stakes of what is being measured are high. There was a scandal that certainly wasn't the only one, but one that was specifically made national news in the US is several years ago in Atlanta, Georgia. Some high school teachers were accused and found guilty of cheating in a pretty explicit way. They simply went to standardized test sheets that their students had turned in, and they simply erased the ones they knew were wrong and marked them as, they changed it to the right answer so it can be sent through the standardized grading machines. And some of them went to court. Some were found guilty. And you're really like, why in the world would a teacher do such a thing? Well, they're a human being, and they had been told in no uncertain terms, scores better improve or you're getting fired. Your student scores better improve or you're getting fired. So they taught, but at the end, I need to make sure I don't get fired. So I need to make sure these scores get improved. So I'm going to do what needs to be done. And again, especially when the stakes are high, this can happen. We might actually be, so sometimes we talk about in our consulting practice when we're looking at organizational design and organizational effectiveness, that sometimes it's not the mice, it's the maze. We tend to focus on the behavior of the mice without paying enough attention to what is the maze that is influencing that behavior. And metrics, performance metrics, are very much part of the maze. So again,
That's amazing, Dave.
It is amazing. That's very right. So again, what I'm not trying to say is that we should throw out performance metrics altogether, because clearly that's not the right answer. But it's this point about making sure we are aware as innovators, as designers, as business leaders, as organizational leaders, as whatever, that we're thinking about here's what we want, and here's what we're proposing to do or what we're doing. What are the potential unintended consequences of this? Right? Again, because if we're dealing with humans, we know how humans tend to behave, especially in certain environments. So that's the end of the third segment, which then again brings us back to a prompt.
And the prompt is, please add your questions and comments about metric fixation to the Zoom chat, or just take a note, because we're getting ready to go into breakout rooms. And yeah, Sarah Jane, depressing. Yeah, I mean, metrics, like the whole idea of measuring things is, it gives us a level of comfort, right? And this conversation that we started 4 weeks ago, and you've been thinking about and reading about, and you're going to share those resources at the end here, is all to try to figure out what are those weaknesses, what are the areas where we can rely on metrics and data, and where should we not rely on metrics and data. And it makes me think of the shuttle disaster, the Challenger shuttle disaster. I was just reading on that earlier, and there was definitely cheating going on, or not cheating, but where the stakes were really high. They were doing measurements on the O-rings that are the thing that failed on the Challenger disaster, and they kind of ignored the whole set of data. And had they not ignored that data, the accident would have happened. So it's totally, there's many examples of when that happens.
Yeah, I'm
right
looking
now.
at the chat.
Go ahead.
Just really quick, I'm looking at the chat. Benjamin Thomas had a note in here about omission or distortion of data and about dealing with outliers. And if I'm not mistaken, that was part of what happened with China. Like, well, that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Unless we try to take off in below freezing temperatures.
Exactly. Right. So let's, without further ado, let's let folks get interactive, and we will. I'm going to open a breakout room. I think right now we're going to have 3 rooms. One is going to be humans and data. That was the first subject David talked about. Then flaws and frames, and then finally metric fixation. So Dave, real quick, tell us just a quick summary about those 3, so everybody remembers.
Yeah, so humans and data was about how we as humans tend to react to and process data, right? So where the spotlight effect comes in, where sometimes we conflate precision with certainty, and how motivated reasoning can influence how we process data, how we react to data. Flaws and frames was about how the flaw of averages, if we're not careful, can get in our way, and about how we frame data can actually have an influence on how the insights we can gain and how it informs decision making. And then lastly was the metric fixation. It's just being careful about how when we measure and reward, when we use metrics to measure and reward human performance, there's a really good chance those metrics are going to be gained, particularly in high stakes situations.
Right. So I'm going to open the breakout rooms now, and you guys, in this case, you're not going to be assigned to a breakout room. You're going to select which of those 3 subjects to go into a breakout room, and you click on it, and you will go into that room to have a discussion with other folks. We're going to have about 10 minutes to do that, and we'll see you on the other side. We'll have a final discussion before we wrap up today's session, and then before we have the half-hour backstage. Ready to go. Here we go. Breakout rooms are open. Please just select which of those 3 subjects you'd like to walk into, and we'll see you back here soon. Does everybody see their little breakout room dialogue? High stakes decision, folks. See you back here soon.
Bye, everyone. Richard says, how do I go to all 3 rooms?
I think you probably can. If you want to jump around, you can certainly do that. But
I think he made the decision to go to the metric fixation one.
Nobody is going to humans and data.
Maybe we can talk about humans and data in the main room.
Sure.
Just a thought. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, what do you guys think? Thanks, David, by the way, for that great presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Definitely tease up the subject very well.
So for now, perhaps we could remove the slide sharing for now,
Sure.
so we could have ourselves.
Yeah.
And I actually went into some media training recently. And so, and one of the key messages they gave us was, don't just throw numbers without not context, but actually translating them into something that people can relate to. It's like, talk about like 20 football fields instead of mentioning some area. Otherwise, you can't relate to it. And suddenly I realized that a lot of my, let's say, communication is perhaps a bit too abstract, and as people don't really relate. And so numbers are really hard to understand. Or even, I had a weird experience in a project a long, long time ago, trying to find out the flaws of the justice system. And I had this nice diagram, typical consultant diagram, a matrix of 2x2 with some bubble charts. And the judge just went and looked at it, and she said, I had a struggle to understand it. And I had to ask my husband, who's a mathematician, and he said, oh, that's very common, blah, 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 and explained it to her. And I thought, how come you do not understand a 2x2 chart? And then I realized, yeah, all her life is just reading text, and so this idea of some graphical representation was actually a bit harder to her. And I was truly amazed, almost in shock, and I'm like, where have you been living all your life? But in fact, it was me living all my life in a consulting environment. And so for me, it was just the most common chart ever. That was really strange, actually. So I thought I was conveying information in a very simple way.
Yep. Pedro, just wanted to let you know your mic, when you move a little bit, we can hear it make a big loud noise. Yeah. What's your reaction to that, David?
I think I've had a similar experience where we were using a 2x2 to categorize ideas after an ideation session.
Yeah.
Somebody pointed out, said, well, I always think of anything to the left of the midpoint as negative. I'm like, oh, I hadn't really thought of that, right? A 2x2, as we know what a 2x2 is. You've got two dimensions, and like, oh, right. Yeah, but you were seeing it as this is 0. And so this must be negative and this must be positive. So we recalibrated how we ended up doing that exercise.
Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting if you think about this whole humans and data thing. What is it about data that is so incredibly compelling to the human brain? Maybe not all human brains, to your point, Pedro, but to certain human brains. What is it about, like in business, for example, if you give numbers to somebody, a manager, of course, they're going to possibly question where the data came from. But then the data, once that's been done, it's like, we got numbers. You know what I mean? What is it that makes that so compelling?
Yeah, even comparing it to qualitative data, which tends to be more difficult to accept and to sell, let's say, to an audience. It's quite surprising. That's true.
I think it's because we can do math on numbers. And feel comfortable that if I'm good at math, especially if I'm good at some higher order math, that I can process this numerical data in such a way that see, here's the answer.
And yet people can see numbers like that, and you can give people numbers that are incontrefutable. Did I say that correctly?
We'll go with it.
I don't use that word very often. And they will still believe something else. It says blue, and they'll say, no way, it's red. I didn't randomly pick those colors. But what is it that is it just, I guess it's just the emotions and the different programming that we have through school that, to your point, Dave, math, but some people they push back on the math, right?
Applying it to the field of human-centered design, it seems like, we do these empathy maps. It seems really important. This drives home how important it is to think about what people see, hear, say. I would even say smell. Like if you're looking, one piece of data can be so deceiving. If you have a picture of a really pretty house with a nice lawn, you may not know, you might think that that's a great house, but you don't know the fact that it's near an airport and you can hear airplanes all the time, or that it's near a waste disposal facility and you can smell it all the time. It kind of, to me, it's like about broadening your frame and making sure you're really delving into somebody's experience before you start trying to judge it or solve it. I guess that's the takeaway I have. That,
Yeah. And especially that others people's experiences or frames may be quite different from our own.
Right.
There's something I picked up both mainly from that TED talk I mentioned about motivated reasoning. It's kind of two thoughts that I think work well as a pair. One is that there's no benefit to being wrong longer. Right? There's no benefit to be, I didn't win a trophy because I was wrong the longest. I held out longer than anybody else. Yay, I'm the winner. No. And then the partner with that is this notion that we should all reserve the right to get smarter. Meaning, here's what I thought, here's what I knew. Now, I know something more or different or better. Turns out I was wrong. That doesn't make me an idiot. It makes me, I didn't know, and now I know.
I would challenge that these days. I think there's some people who there's a reward for being wrong longer.
Yeah.
Like, there's evidence about, I don't know, that say COVID vaccines work, but there's people who are refusing to accept that because their audience, the people that listen to them or the clique that they're in, wants to deny it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so this is what I was kind of getting at, is like, why is data so attractive? And in some cases it's not, right? Because you get in that cognitive dissonance where your preconceived notion that the confirmation bias thing.
We've got 2 minutes
2 minutes left. Okay.
Yeah.
I do. I want to just make sure that it's not that Marvin and Ayana and Andrew, if you guys want to jump in, please. If you have any comments or.
So I came in a little bit late and, coming on video. And my summer class I'm teaching starts in about 14 minutes, so I'm going to pop off.
Yeah.
But I thought some of the information was really interesting. And one of the things that David, you had alluded to when I popped in was about, basically the corruption of data, right? And how we use it to, and I really appreciate you using the Atlanta teacher story, because so many of us were like, wait, what's going on? And then we see how, certain social factors and factor into how we want to then impact this information and essentially feel like we have to cheat. I had a student plagiarize a project this semester. And I kind of went, what? I've never had a face plagiarism from anybody before. I teach a design class. This is a design tools class, actually. Mm. And she used another student's project as her template, she said. And I said, no, you can't do that. But again, this sense of, I've got to get this grade, so I better just cheat, And so matrix to me, or data to me, is like, how do we ensure the integrity of those who are presenting? How do we come to understand the integrity of those who are presenting this data? And what's the underlying story? What's all that's going on? Am I off mark here? Does that make sense?
No, I think you're right on. And I'm glad to hear that the Atlanta story resonated with you, because I'm a former high school teacher. When I read that, it's like, oh, those bad teachers. And like, oh, wait a minute. No, it wasn't the mice, it was the maze.
Right.
Yeah.
Too. Thank you, guys. This has been really great. I'll be on next time.
Good to see you again, Ayana.
I'm going to watch the replay as well. Okay.
Okay. Great to see you.
Great to see you all.
Yeah.
Bye.
I think what's interesting, and we're bringing everybody back here in a minute. What's interesting is, like, how do we as designers, I love your term, solution makers. Is that what you said, David?
Solution finders.
Solution finders, solution seekers. How do we take data, both qualitative and quantitative data? I guess that's what we have to work with. right?
Yeah. Because
I mean,
our
is there something else we have to work with? I mean, context, but context is also data, right? Context is made up of data. Is there anything other than data that we actually can use, whether it's qualitative or quantitative? I mean, our emotions, are our emotions data? Subject for another Wednesday.
I think I got something for you there, Mark.
Please.
No, as maybe a topic. I'll talk to you.
Oh,
about
okay,
it.
okay.
So I was just saying in our group, we use this in our business disc, and it's about communication styles. And I was saying 2/3 of the population in the U.S. at least, I haven't seen the study for worldwide, but in the U.S. anyways, are people and feeling responsive. That's how they communicate. They're people and feelings. They're either introverts or extroverts, but it's about people and feelings. 1/3 of us are data and task driven. So when you put data in front of somebody who's an emotional responder, what does that do? And then how does a highly task and data driven person communicate with somebody who is an emotionally responsive person? And do those people even communicate at all?
Yeah.
And that's when you start putting data and focusing only on data and not on behavior, that's where all data is wonderful for the macro, for the trending. But when you start getting down to people, they're people. And that's where it gets confusing.
Awesome. Yeah, no, really good point, Rich.
Richard, can you show the grid again that you just, yeah.
Sorry. I think it's backwards in this, but it's basically you're either an introvert and extrovert. Well, extrovert, introvert, and you're about facts and feelings, or facts and tasks, or feelings and people. And
that makes me feel really good because I know exactly where to put you, Richard.
Where am I?
No, I'm just joking, but like that does give you, like, those assessments give you, they're awesome to help you think about how you interact with other people and how you see the world and how you interact with the world. But it's also a great example of how you're just putting people in a box, right?
Yeah.
You know, you're like this, and that's the way you're going to be labeled. Don't they have, like, or is it, it's not DISC, but it's the Myers-Briggs. It's like, I'm a B4, 9,
yeah, there's
whatever
like
it is.
17 different permutations.
Whatever, you know.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
oh, that's very comfortable as a CEO. I know I have 12 B4-9s and 13.
Yeah. So even like you said, it's counter. Yeah. Even though we're trying to, it's just, it gets down to people. We still put them in a place, and it's like, okay, how do you communicate with that person?
And even that, right? Using that as a jumping off point, the notion that introvert or extrovert, even that it depends.
Yeah, it can.
It depends.
Yeah.
Depends on the setting. Am I more likely to, run my mouth, or I'm like, no, I'm just going to sit back and.
Yeah. But I just love the way data fits in all this, and getting back, David, to yours is just this idea of are we asking the right questions? Do we have enough data? How does somebody who thinks very logically through something, are they going to take in all this and say, well, wait a minute, we need 3 more questions answered here before we can come to any conclusion? Or somebody else looks at it and comes to the conclusion immediately.
Right.
Awesome. Really quickly, since the 3 of us have been talking a little bit, any other comments or questions, observations from anybody else? Jump in.
Or even pushback. This is just where I am right now.
We can wait all day.
What?
Benjamin, do you have anything to add? You're on.
I would say maybe just because I'm in New York, I have a different view of, if we go back to the cars and the cars stopping, like a lot of those cars for me stopped enough to consider it a stop. But maybe I have a different frame of reference. The other thing was that I thought the stopping wasn't the problem. The problem was they were stopping too far into the incoming left traffic because they couldn't see.
Yep.
So that's the only thing I can add.
Well, I love that you said that because, forget that specific context for a moment. We see these statistics. It's helpful to understand, like, well, how would this define? What do you mean stopped?
Yeah.
Right? Is slow, below 2 miles an hour? Is that a stop? Maybe, maybe not. And if two different people were using two different measures, then we think we're comparing apples and apples, and we're not. And we're not. So understanding, like, okay, how are these terms being defined of this, these measures that you're presenting?
In some countries, a stop. Sorry, in some countries, a stop is not actually stop. It's just like you go slow to give preference. You see, like in Brazil, you just slow down. You don't need to stop. Actually, if somebody coming, you stop. So it depends how you measure it.
Absolutely.
I would say not to jump to solutionings, but New York just adds a rotary everywhere. Like that's the new thing. So there you go.
Yep. Yeah. There's some interesting behavior stuff around that. So for those of you who are behavioral economics geeks, and there is a book called Traffic, and the subtitle is something like Why We Drive the Way We Do and What It Says About Us. And it is a fascinating deep dive into how things are related to traffic and traffic control, how they're designed either for us or against us. And roundabouts are one of those things. Is that, if I remember it correctly, is that because it feels a little more like, I'm not sure what these other idiots are going to do, I better take care, that we all tend to take care, except for the idiots, right? Because I'm going to slow down because I don't think he's going to slow down.
Speaking of traffic control, I do want to just open up the floor to one or two other voices. We've got maybe 1 or 2 minutes. Sarah Jane, Anupa, Courtney, any comments or thoughts?
Yeah, I had a question, which I was just thinking about when we were talking about metrics in our group. When we're creating data out of metrics, how does it pose as an equalizer? Because, when we're creating an outcome from data, it's going to either support a group or not. So, how does it build that kind of, and Mark, I was just telling them that, for me, the key metrics is about polarities, like what we had last week, because it's about like two different outcomes. It's either this or that. So I was just like thinking about what you thought, David.
The unhelpful answer is it depends. But I think for me, the one of the key takeaways, or at least what I'm taking away from my exploration of this topic, is to be careful when we're certain about something, and also to be careful about what metrics we might be using and how others might make meaning from that data. And might we be unintentionally leading people astray because of what we presented or maybe what we didn't present? Yep. And so I think for me, the overall thing is about just combining data and statistics and analytics and metrics with human judgment, particularly when judgment is experienced judgment. Right? When we can marry both appropriately, I think that gives us our best chance at making good informed decisions.
Awesome. And thanks for that observation, Anupa, because I when we go to the backstage here in just a minute, I want to dig into that. And exactly what you said, David, is like, we're talking about data and how it affects humans and how we make decisions, but what happens after the decisions, or how do we make sure we're making the right decisions? You know what I'm saying? You can use data and say, I'm making this decision, but then what? Are you just, okay, decision made, going on vacation, we're going to New York City. No, there's a lot that happens after that. So for example, the whole idea of unintended consequences is a thing that you need to evaluate after you make a decision or while you're making a decision. And I think it's thinking about how we make decisions in all contexts, especially around designing solutions, is data. What is data the only thing you're using, right? And how are you evaluating your decisions? I think that's an interesting thing to jump into. Next week, same time, same station. We will not be here, so don't show up. We're taking a break. I just am going backwards in my slides. So we're going fishing, as we say in America. So taking a break. But the week after that, so 2 weeks from now, Steve, tell us a little bit about what to expect.
Yes, we have a a new presenter. It's Deepshika Yadav. She's going to be running a session on pastiche scenarios where fiction meets experience-centered design. I've seen a little bit of how she does this, and it's great. It's a great new tool to add to your toolkit. So come and learn a new approach to innovation facilitation. Yeah,
Cool.
See you in 2 weeks.
Awesome. June 15th, will anybody on here will get an email.
You can
You'll be able to-
register in the chat as well.
Thank you, Mim. You've
Yes.
also put the registration link. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yay.
Want to remind everybody that you're welcome to submit an idea for a jam session. It's bit.ly/WWJ ideas. That's the URL. You can click on that and it'll also be in the chat. Also, you can follow us or visit us on our website. Follow us at Wednesday Web Jam. We also have a LinkedIn channel. That's where a lot of stuff happens. And Facebook. These are our smiling faces. Remember, this is all a voluntary effort. We always like to thank our guest presenters. David, thank you so much for that awesome session. We can't do it without our guests, but they're behind the scenes doing all the legwork as a crew. We have a goal every year of about $1,000 to support our expenses, which is MailChimp, Zoom, all those kind of technical things. We don't make any money from that. If you want to buy us a coffee, you can go to Ko-fi at coffee or whatever it's pronounced and buy us a coffee. And without further ado, right on time, I will stop the live stream and we're going to go to backstage. I guess we can say goodbye to YouTube.
Goodbye, YouTube.